It was supposed to be just another routine flight, until a man collapsed in the aisle. Every second counted, every heartbeat mattered. And then, something unbelievable happened. A trained doctor rushed to save a life, only to be stopped by the very person meant to protect passengers. What followed next would shock everyone on board, force federal authorities to intervene, and leave passengers questioning the very meaning of justice. The plane was cruising at 35,000 feet when chaos erupted. A man, James, suddenly collapsed in the aisle, gasping, his life slipping away in front of terrified passengers. Panic spread like wildfire. Andre, a skilled doctor sitting just rows away, leapt into action. His hands moved instinctively, his mind racing through every protocol, every life-saving maneuver he'd ever learned. But then, Emily, the flight attendant, stepped in. Her voice was firm, unyielding. "Sir, you're not allowed to help," she said. Confusion froze the cabin. Whispers turned into shouts. Every second felt like an eternity. Andre tried to explain, tried to assert his training, but Emily blocked him at every turn. The tension was unbearable. James's face was pale, his breaths shallow, and time was running out. Passengers stared, powerless, hearts pounding. Every second mattered, and just when it seemed like there was no hope, the unthinkable happened. The flight crew radioed a message that would change everything. Within minutes, FBI agent Rachel Monroe would storm the plane, her arrival promising answers, but raising even more questions. Why was Andre, a trained doctor, prevented from saving a life in the sky? What could possibly justify stopping someone from acting when every moment counted? And what would happen once the FBI got involved? The answers weren't simple, and the consequences would shake everyone on that flight to their core. Andre Carter had built his life around precision and purpose. At 36, he was a skilled physician known for his calm under pressure, a man who could read vital signs like others read books. Outside the hospital, he was warm and grounded, the kind of friend who remembered birthdays, called family just to check in, and carried a quiet confidence that made people feel safe. This morning, he was headed to a medical conference in another city, a chance to share his research, learn new techniques, and reconnect with colleagues. On the plane, he settled into his window seat, laptop open, coffee in hand, headphones playing soft jazz. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. He offered polite smiles to passengers who returned them with varying degrees of warmth. Some looked past him. Others nodded with quiet acknowledgement. He noticed, briefly, the subtle hesitation in a few eyes, but shrugged it off. In Andre's world, skill and preparation mattered far more than perception. Across the aisle sat James, a middle-aged businessman with kind eyes and a wide smile, chatting softly with his young wife. He radiated calm confidence, the kind of presence that made those around him feel at ease. His excitement about seeing his children after the trip was palpable. Nearby, Emily, a flight attendant, moved briskly down the aisle. She was in her early 30s, uniform crisp and perfect, a professional smile pasted on her face as she greeted passengers and reminded them to buckle their seatbelts. Her efficiency was impressive, but her eyes carried a sharp edge, the kind of awareness born from countless encounters with difficult passengers. Andre's life had always been a balancing act between skill and awareness. He had learned to navigate the subtle currents of prejudice in quiet moments. A glance that lingered too long, a handshake that felt hesitant, a comment that implied he didn't quite belong. Most of the time he ignored it. Most of the time his work spoke louder than whispers. As the plane ascended, the sun glinted off the wings, scattering warm light across the cabin. Andre sipped his coffee, reviewing his notes for the conference, thinking of his patients and colleagues. Everything felt routine, calm, predictable, even comforting. Around him, the hum of the engines blended with soft chatter, the turning pages of a magazine, the tapping of a laptop keyboard. Life at 35,000 feet felt detached, almost peaceful. Yet beneath this calm, subtle undercurrents of tension existed small signs that the world sometimes reacted differently to him. He didn't dwell on them. He never did. But unknowingly, he was on a flight where those currents would surge into a storm. What seemed like a normal day, a routine flight, was about to become a test of everything he had learned. Not about medicine, but about courage, integrity, and the unseen barriers that still existed in a world that claimed to be fair. And high above the clouds, no one yet knew that a single life-or-death moment would shatter this ordinary calm, forcing Andre and everyone around him to confront something far larger than themselves. Andre Carter's calm flight transformed into chaos in seconds. James, sitting a few rows ahead, suddenly collapsed in the aisle. A strangled cry escaped from his lips, and his body slumped sideways. Panic rippled through the cabin like electricity. Passengers froze, some gasped, others reached instinctively for phones to call for help. Andre didn't hesitate. His training kicked in. He vaulted from his seat, weaving through terrified passengers, his mind running every procedure simultaneously.
Clear the area.
"Sir, I need space," he shouted, voice steady despite the pounding of his own heart. But then Emily stepped in. Her stance was firm, her arms crossing over the narrow path. "Sir, you cannot do that," she said, her voice clipped, official. Andre's chest tightened. "I'm a doctor." "He's dying!" he demanded, urgency in every syllable. Passengers watched, horrified. A young woman muttered under her breath, "Why won't she let him help?" But Emily didn't waver. She blocked Andre's path with the precision of someone trained to enforce rules above empathy. Andre's frustration built like a storm. He tried again. "I can save him! Please move!" But Emily waved him off, and a murmur of approval rose from a few nearby passengers, as if his race, his presence, somehow made his authority negotiable. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered questions like, "Is he supposed to be allowed?" Every second counted. James's breathing became shallower, and Andre could feel the life slipping away. He glanced around, searching for an ally among the crew, but the flight attendants were silent, frozen by protocol or fear. His hands hovered helplessly over James's chest, his mind screaming, "Do I fight or obey?" Andre finally moved. A single step forward. Emily raised her voice, louder now, drawing attention. "Sit down, sir. You are not authorized." The cabin erupted into murmurs and shouts. Passengers began taking sides, some supportive, some confused. The tension was suffocating, electric. Suddenly, a subtle shift. Someone from first class, a woman in business attire, whispered to Emily, and Emily hesitated. Andre seized the moment, crouching by James, assessing him. He gave a quick professional evaluation, murmuring under his breath, heart racing. Every touch, every maneuver felt like a rebellion against an invisible barrier, and every second mattered. Just when it seemed Andre might stabilize James, the plane jolted slightly, turbulence throwing the cabin into further panic. Passengers screamed. Tray tables rattled. Bags shifted from overhead bins. In the chaos, Andre had to navigate around not just physical obstacles, but a wall of prejudice. Emily's gaze following his every move with sharp suspicion. Andre's internal voice battled with his instinct. "I can't let him die. I refuse. But if I push too hard..." Sweat dripped down his temple. James's pulse was fading. The line between order and life-saving urgency blurred. Then came the announcement that would change everything. "We are contacting authorities on the ground. Please remain seated." Andre's head shot up. The word authorities echoed ominously, and moments later, a message buzzed through the crew. The FBI was on its way, alerting them that the situation was now a federal matter. Passengers exchanged anxious glances. Andre's heart sank and soared simultaneously. Finally, official intervention. But questions remained. Would they allow him to save James, or would protocol once again come first? Could he fight the rules, or would someone die because of hesitation, bias, and fear? The cabin held its collective breath. Every face mirrored the tension, the moral conflict, the silent accusation. What is justice, and who gets to decide it in the air, far from the world below? As Andre prepared to act again, Emily's eyes locked on him, a mixture of defiance and doubt. The plane became a battlefield, not of weapons, but of conscience, urgency, and human decency. Every second from now could tip the scale toward life or tragedy. Andre's pulse hammered in his ears as he hovered over James, whose breathing had slowed to a fragile whisper. The cabin was silent, yet every sound seemed amplified. The rustling of oxygen masks, the nervous whispers of passengers, the rattling of overhead bins in turbulence. Time had become a weapon against him, each second carrying the weight of life or death. Emily's arms blocked him again, her eyes cold, unwavering. "Sir, step back. You are not allowed," she barked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The words felt like a betrayal. Andre's hands trembled, not from fear but from fury, the kind of rage that comes from seeing injustice in its rawest form. "I don't care about rules," he shouted, voice cracking, resonating across the aisle. "He's dying!" Passengers' faces mirrored a mixture of shock, fear, and indignation. Some whispered, others shook their heads, unsure what to do. A few passengers, mostly women and older men, murmured in support of Andre, their voices small but present. "Let him help," one shouted. The cabin seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos, emotions colliding with authority and morality battling procedure. Andre crouched lower, checking James's pulse. It was faint, dangerously faint. His mind raced. If I hesitate, he dies. If I push, I face repercussions. But there was no question of morality. Life was paramount. He leaned forward, ignoring Emily's outstretched hand, gripping James's chest, positioning his hands with precision and authority. Emily took a step back, hesitating now. Something in Andre's unwavering gaze, the intensity, the knowledge, the urgency, forced a flicker of doubt. He could see it in her eyes, the rigid rules clashing with human instinct, the inner conflict she could no longer fully suppress. Then, the plane shuddered violently, turbulence stronger than before. Screams echoed. Bags shifted dangerously overhead. A woman's phone clattered to the floor. James's face turned pale, lips barely moving. Andre's heart leapt into his throat. Every movement mattered. Every second counted. He began chest compressions, counting rhythmically, praying that the life within James hadn't already left him. Emily's stance faltered further. I just, she stammered, uncertainty cracking her authority. Her voice trailed off as Andre's hands continued their life-saving rhythm. A small group of passengers leaned forward, whispering encouragement. "You're doing the right thing. Don't stop." Their support, though faint, was a lifeline in the suffocating tension. Andre felt a surge of determination. He wouldn't be silenced. He wouldn't be stopped by prejudice or bureaucracy. James's life depended on it. And then the announcement came over the intercom. "Authorities on the ground are aware of the situation. FBI support is en route." The words sliced through the tension, adding weight to the moment. The very system that often ignored injustice was now acknowledging the crisis. But Andre couldn't wait. He had no time for bureaucracy or rules. Minutes stretched like hours. James coughed, a weak but unmistakable sign of life. Andre's chest heaved with relief, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The cabin exhaled collectively, though tension lingered like a storm cloud. Emily, pale and trembling, stepped aside completely. Andre didn't look at her. All focus remained on James. He continued compressions, alternating with rapid assessment, until James's eyes fluttered open. Weak but alive, a cheer erupted quietly from the passengers nearest them. Tears glistened on a woman's cheek. An older man muttered, "Thank God." Andre finally leaned back, exhaustion overtaking him, sweat matting his hair to his forehead. He looked around at the passengers, the crew, the tense, fraught faces that had witnessed this battle of life versus rules. But even in victory, the air remained thick with unspoken tension. The looming presence of the FBI added a new layer. Questions about accountability, bias, and justice hung like an invisible cloud. Andre could see it in the passengers' eyes. Admiration, confusion, and a silent acknowledgement that the fight had been larger than a single emergency. Emily turned away, her face unreadable, but a flicker of shame or realization crossed her features. Andre's hands were trembling, not from fatigue, but from the raw emotional toll of confronting not just a life or death moment, but systemic bias in its most immediate form. Just as the cabin began to settle, a shadow appeared near the cockpit doorway. Agent Rachel Monroe, FBI badge glinting under the cabin lights. Her presence was a promise of intervention, but also a question. Who would be held accountable for the moments that nearly cost a man his life? Andre's eyes met hers. No words were needed. The unspoken truth lingered. Courage had won this battle. But the war against prejudice, rules that fail humanity, and societal injustice was far from over. The plane felt smaller, yet infinitely larger, as the implications of what had just unfolded settled over everyone. And for Andre, the weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavy and undeniable. He had saved a life, but the question remained: would justice truly follow, or would the system protect its own? The plane finally leveled, the turbulence fading, yet the tension remained thick. Passengers who had moments before been frozen in fear were now cautiously exhaling, still processing the chaos that had erupted around them. Andre Carter sat back slightly, chest heaving, sweat matted in his hair, but a quiet satisfaction glimmered in his eyes. He had saved a life. James, though weak and pale, sat upright now, supported by Andre and a small cluster of passengers who had offered blankets, water, and quiet words of encouragement. The cabin's atmosphere shifted as the hum of the engines became a background rhythm rather than a source of terror. But the emotional weight lingered. Emily, who had once stood firmly in the way, now hovered silently by the rear, her expression unreadable. There was no cheer for her, no applause, no congratulations, only a simmering tension that Andre could feel like static in the air. Minutes later, the shadow of authority materialized. Agent Rachel Monroe stepped fully into the cabin, her badge catching the light. She moved with precision, her presence commanding the attention of the entire plane. She first addressed the crew, taking statements, assessing the situation. Then her gaze swept the passengers, lingering for a fraction of a second on Andre. Recognition and gratitude flashed in her eyes. She understood exactly what he had done. Andre was asked to recount the events, step by step, and his words carried the gravity of the moment. He described James's collapse, his own immediate response, Emily's obstruction, and the small but pivotal role the other passengers had played in supporting him. His voice was steady, professional, yet tinged with raw emotion. He didn't embellish. He didn't minimize. He simply told the truth. Emily's statement was shorter, defensive at first, but cracks in her narrative began to show under the scrutiny of Agent Monroe's calm questioning. Andre noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor, her initial certainty fading into unease, the rigid adherence to protocol bending under the weight of human consequences. For Andre, this was both satisfying and sobering. Courage could force accountability, but real change required more than one act of bravery. James's family, who had been informed by flight attendants and airport authorities, finally arrived to support him upon landing. Relief washed over everyone. Tears, embraces, and whispered expressions of gratitude filled the airport terminal. James himself looked at Andre with a mixture of awe and unspoken understanding. Words were inadequate to describe the magnitude of what had just occurred, but the bond forged in crisis was palpable, a shared recognition that, against fear and injustice, courage and compassion had prevailed. In the days that followed, the incident sparked nationwide attention. Video footage taken by passengers circulated online, highlighting the contrast between Andre's urgent professionalism and Emily's initial obstruction. The public response was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with support for Andre and outrage at the behavior of the flight attendant. Headlines focused on the life saved, but also on the systemic bias that had nearly prevented it. Emily faced consequences for her actions, including suspension and mandatory training on emergency procedures and unconscious bias. Andre was lauded for his courage, receiving commendations from professional medical organizations, advocacy groups, and community leaders. But more importantly, the story inspired dialogue, conversations about how prejudice and systemic bias can infiltrate even the most ordinary environments, and how they can threaten lives in moments when humanity and compassion are needed most. Andre's reflection on the incident was quiet but profound. He realized that courage is not just a reaction to danger. It is a deliberate choice to act in the face of fear, uncertainty, and systemic barriers. His decision to prioritize James's life over protocol was not just heroic, it was necessary. And yet he understood that one act of courage cannot fix a broken system on its own. It requires continuous vigilance, advocacy, and the willingness to confront injustice whenever and wherever it appears. James, now fully recovered, became an advocate alongside Andre. Together, they spoke at community centers, hospitals, and schools, sharing the story of that flight, not just as a tale of survival, but as a testament to the destructive power of prejudice and the transformative power of courage and unity. Their message was clear. Racism and discrimination destroy lives, weaken communities, and erode trust. Courage, empathy, and solidarity can rebuild it. Andre's life returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet nothing would ever feel entirely ordinary again. The memory of the flight, the fear, the urgency, the moral confrontation lingered like a scar, a reminder that vigilance is always necessary. But it also carried hope that individuals could rise above fear, that collective awareness could spark change, and that even in moments of systemic failure, human decency could prevail. The story of that flight became more than just a dramatic incident. It became a lesson, a parable of modern society. It reminded people that authority and protocol, while important, are not absolutes when human lives hang in the balance. It reminded them that prejudice, even subtle, can be deadly. And it reminded them that courage, quiet, steadfast, and uncompromising, has the power to save not just lives, but the moral compass of a community. Moral takeaway: racism destroys families. Prejudice weakens communities. Unity brings healing. Courage defeats hate. As the camera pans out, metaphorically or literally in visual storytelling, the image lingers on Andre walking through the terminal, surrounded by people who once feared, who once doubted, and now who witnessed the triumph of humanity over bias. The plane that once held tension and injustice had delivered a lesson far greater than any flight. That courage, empathy, and moral integrity are forces capable of confronting hate, bridging divides, and saving lives.